you will hear a conversation between a man and a woman discussing the rental of a car.
Good morning, sir. Welcome to Cheapy's Car Hire. Can I help you?
Yes, please. I need to rent a car.
That's no problem, sir. When would you like it?
Tomorrow morning.
Let's look then. Today is the 6th of August, so you'll need it on the 7th of August.
That's right.
Now, I'll just need to take some details from you, sir. Can I take your name, please?
John Wilson.
And your home address?
95 Green Lane, Manchester.
Green like the colour?
Yes, that's right. And the postcode is MW7 4DF.
OK, got that. Can I have your telephone numbers, please?
My home number is 0206 834 6387 and my mobile is 0779 724 868.
Sorry, I missed the mobile.
It's 07779 724 868.
Thanks. Now, are you the holder of a full current driver's licence?
Yes, I am.
Could I take the number of the licence, please?
Sure. Let's have a look now. It's WIL 948578269.
And will there be any other drivers or just you?
Only me, please.
OK. You said that you wanted the car tomorrow, but how long will you want it for?
Well, tomorrow's Friday the 7th, and I want it for the whole weekend, so I'll bring it back on Monday morning.
I'll have to charge you for all Friday and Monday, sir.
That's okay.
Good. Now, what kind of car were you looking for, sir?
I'd like a fairly small car, as I'll be driving a lot around town, and a smaller car will be easier to get around and to park.
Yes, that's true. Well, I've got small sizes in the following types of car: a Ford, a Renault and a Toyota. They're pretty much the same, though the Toyota is in a cheaper price category.
I'll take the cheapest one, please.
And we can offer you a petrol or a diesel model with that car.
Oh, in that case I'll take the diesel, as that will be more economical. Now, how much will this cost me?
Well, the daily rate is £50, but it's only £40 if you take the car for 4 days or more. Let's see. There's also an additional £10 for insurance. That's not obligatory, but we do recommend that you take the insurance.
Yes, definitely.
So that will be £170 for the 4 days then.
Fine. Where can I pick it up?
You can pick it up here, at the airport, or at your hotel. Which hotel are you in?
I'm staying at a friend's house next to the International Hotel. So, can you leave it at the International Hotel, and then I can walk around to pick it up? I'll drop it off at the same place if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine. By the way, if you have a breakdown or an accident, we'll supply you with a new hire car ASAP. Our emergency number is on this customer information leaflet, which also has other information. Here you are, and here is a spare set of keys for the car. Now, let me tell you about some things in the car that will be there to help you. First of all, your insurance documents will be in the glove compartment, along with a Wesley City map and the car manual. On the back seat, there will be a larger area map of the local district. If you need a map of any other place, like London, then give us a call and we'll make sure it's there.
No, I won't need that.
In the boot, you'll find a spare wheel and a set of tools in case you have a problem. We have membership with the RAC, so you can call them if you're really in trouble. The membership card and phone number is in the glove compartment too. There will be a small fire extinguisher under the passenger seat, but I hope you won't have to use that.
Great. So where do I pay?
If you go over there to Mr. Walker, then he'll sort you out.
Cocoa farming. Chock-a-block. Latin America's farmers want to cash in on high prices by upping their output.
The latest El Niño weather cycle has ended. Latin America's farmers are assessing the damage. It is mostly bad news. Many places flooded while others suffered extreme heat and drought. Harvests of most staples have been meagre. Falling prices have added insult to injury, eroding farmers' profits. But cocoa, the core ingredient in chocolate, is bucking the trend. Output has risen in Ecuador and Brazil, the region's two largest growers, as well as in countries like Peru, Colombia, and the Dominican Republic, which produce less. That is mostly down to luck. The areas where cocoa is grown, such as the coastal provinces in Ecuador and northeastern Brazil, escaped the worst of the weather. And the price of cocoa has surged over the past 6 months too, thanks largely to the collapse of production in West Africa, where most of it is grown. The value of exports from Latin America has shot up. Ecuador earned 32% more selling cocoa to overseas buyers in 2023 than it did in 2022. Exports then tripled in value from the beginning of the year compared with the same period in 2023. Cocoa has become one of the region's most valuable exports. In West Africa, growers are paid a fixed price set by their governments. Latin American producers sell at the global market price. Their counterparts in Ivory Coast and Ghana get $2,460 for every ton of cocoa, even as the global price oscillates around $10,000. Tempting though it may be to bank the windfall cash, many farmers spy an opportunity to invest in order to produce more. Many are buying high-yielding seedlings, expanding their growing areas and planting cocoa instead of less profitable crops. National agricultural associations are backing the investment. To increase efficiency, they are boosting availability of fertilizer, providing advice about effective pruning, managing pests, and spotting disease. Latin America's cocoa farmers collect well under a ton of crop per hectare. Most cocoa-growing countries in the region are trying to double that. The hope is to return Latin America's cocoa industry to its former glory. Brazil was the world's largest grower until its crop was clobbered by fungal disease in the late 1980s and early 1990s. In 2023, its agriculture ministry unveiled a plan to produce 400,000 tons by 2030, up from 290,000 in 2023. Ecuador's government is even more ambitious, aiming for 800,000 tons in 2030, up from 420,000 last year. The industry will need to harness technology in order to lift output if it is to meet these targets. That is beginning to happen. Some tasks that have traditionally been done by hand are now being mechanized. But most Latin cocoa farmers are smallholders with a handful of hectares apiece. Smart irrigation systems and harvest automating machinery don't pay off when used on such small patches. World cocoa prices may, of course, fall. Farmers who invest in increasing output risk being saddled with unsold stock or having to offload it cheaply. But even if better weather in West Africa prompts cocoa production to bounce back next year, the long-term outlook there is gloomy. Most of its farmers are old and poor. Their national cocoa authorities are inefficiently run and in some cases are almost bankrupt. Tough European Union regulations on deforestation are due to come into force next year. These will hurt African producers more than Latin American ones as they export more to the EU. Sluggish African production will probably mean global cocoa prices stay high because so few other countries can grow the crop. The plant is finicky. Where banana yields some 25 tons per hectare, cocoa yields about 500 kilograms on average. It needs high levels of humidity and warm overnight temperatures to thrive, with regular rainfall and sunshine, though not too much. So it likes low elevations close to the equator. Not many places offer this. In the long run, climate change is likely to limit production, with the best growing areas being disrupted. This will prop up prices. Demand is strong and growing, partly because Asians are eating more chocolate. That should reassure Latin America's cocoa farmers. Their challenge will be finding ways to pay for new technologies in order to produce more.
Describing festivals, events, ceremonies.
Sarah, welcome back. How was your trip to China?
It was fantastic. It's an amazing country with a fascinating history. There are so many things to see.
Oh yeah? So what do you remember most about it?
Well, one really interesting thing was the Dragon Boat Festival. I was there both before and during the festival, so I got a really good idea of how it's all done.
Tell me about it.
It takes place on the 5th day of the 5th month of the Chinese lunar calendar, and it combines the sports event with a traditional celebration based on the legend of Chu Yuan, who lived 2,300 years ago.
So what's the legend about?
Well, his story is quite tragic, really.
Uh-huh.
He was a very patriotic person and an advisor to the ruler of the state. Oh, he was a well-known poet as well. Anyway, he was in favour of an unpopular policy and was banished to a place south of the Yangtze River. Eventually, he drowned himself because he was so unhappy over his banishment. Then the village people went out to search for him, and they threw rice dumplings into the water to keep dragons and evil spirits away from his body.
Oh, so that's why they have dragon-shaped boats for the festival.
Yeah, that's right. Weeks before the festival, they start repainting and polishing the carved boats. And the boat race contestants do a lot of training as well.
So what happens at the festival nowadays? Do people still go out in their boats and throw rice in the water?
No, not really. But there are the boat races, and the spectators eat sticky rice cakes called zongzi to remember the rice dumplings that were thrown into the water so long ago.
That sounds fascinating.
Oh, it is. The boats are so gorgeous, and the race is really, really exciting. It was an unforgettable experience.
In recent months, reports of extreme weather have reached new levels. Some climate scientists say they cannot remember when the world had so much extreme weather. In Brazil, for example, flooding killed at least 100 people and damaged the southern city of Porto Alegre. Voters and politicians in India are facing heat as high as 46 degrees Celsius during national elections. A heat wave caused officials to close schools in the Philippines. Thailand has reported deaths from record heat. Weather experts are also reporting high heat in Indonesia, Malaysia, the Maldives, and Myanmar. Record temperatures hit many parts of Africa too. In the United States, the National Weather Service Storm Prediction Center recently put a message on social media service X. It said April had the second highest number of tornadoes for that month ever recorded. Jonathan Overpeck leads the School for Environment and Sustainability at the University of Michigan. He said it is not surprising to see worsening climate extremes so early in the year. The climate expert added, if this record pace of warming continues, 2024 will likely be a record year of climate disasters and human suffering. Some scientists have been saying that when the world is warmer, it is likely to have more extreme weather. They call these climate events, including record heat and rainfall. They say climate change is also changing where and when weather events take place. Alvaro Silva said that leads to rainy and hot systems staying over areas for longer periods. Silva is a climate scientist at the World Meteorological Organization based in Geneva. Climate scientists have reported 13 straight months of record high ocean temperatures as a possible influence on the weather extremes. Recently, the European climate service Copernicus reported the 11th record-breaking month in a row for the world's average temperature. The average global temperature of 15 degrees Celsius in April beat the old record from 2016 by 0.14 degrees Celsius. Copernicus's data dates back to 1950. Last month was 1.58 degrees Celsius warmer than what climate scientists call the pre-industrial period of the late 19th century. Countries signing the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015 set a goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Several influences play a part in the recent extremes. Silva said climate change is the most important one. In the first 5 days of May, 70 countries or territories broke heat records, said climatologist Maximiliano Herrera. He follows temperature records across the world. Recently in Southeast Asia, it was the hottest May night ever, Herrera posted on X. Parts of Thailand did not drop below 31 degrees Celsius. Many African nations are also facing extreme heat. Herrera said it reached 47.5 degrees Celsius in Kayes, Mali. The capital of Niger, Niamey, had its hottest May night, and Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou, had its hottest night for any month. The heat in Brazil affected cities like Sao Paulo and kept a rainstorm from moving over the country's south. Francisco Aquino, a climatologist at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, said that caused the weather to become dangerous. There was also an increase in humidity from the Amazon River area, which Aquino called flying rivers. The flying rivers are air currents that carry a lot of water vapor. These caused clouds to generate extreme rainfall, he said. April also brought the heaviest rains ever recorded to the United Arab Emirates. Parts of major highways flooded, as did Dubai International Airport, the world's busiest airport for international travel.
London is famous for its museums, historic architecture, theatres and nightlife, but is also home to some very special parks. The British capital has more than 1,000 green spaces, including notable public parks and commons. While some are well known, others are quiet, secret places. Described as the green lungs of London, parks help to reduce pollution. They also make it easy to forget that you are in the heart of a noisy, fast-moving city of more than 9.3 million people. Parks provide clean air and natural beauty, a relaxing escape from the pressures of modern urban life. London is not the greenest city in the world. That honour goes to Moscow, which is 54% green space. But its parks are distinctive and varied in size and character. In 1845, Victoria Park in East London opened as the city's first public park. Battersea, Finsbury and Southwark parks opened soon after, bringing the opportunity for fresh air and green open space to an increasingly urban population. Other parks and gardens have been created with specific aims, such as enhancing well-being for medicinal purposes, entertainment or for holding exhibitions. By contrast, London's commons, of which there are more than 100 spread across the city, are much older. Many date back to the 11th century and were once used for common grazing of farm animals. As London's population grew, private landowners enclosed formerly open land. Fortunately, some of the city's common lands were protected by successful campaigns that ensured famous green areas such as Hampstead Heath, Wimbledon Common and Clapham Common were kept open to subsequent generations of Londoners. Parks, of course, are much more than just open spaces filled with grass and trees. They are places for relaxation, activity and entertainment, to observe nature, meditate or to meet friends. One week, a park could be a venue for a music or food festival, the next for a park run event or a pop-up art exhibition. Popular in all weathers, London's parks have been particularly important to support city residents' physical and mental health during the COVID crisis restrictions. Many people have relied on London's parks for much-needed exercise and escape. And of course, because they are free of charge to use.
Haina Khan is a 9th grade student in Dhaka, Bangladesh. She struggled to keep attention on her studies last week as temperatures rose above 43 degrees Celsius in Bangladesh's capital. There is no real education in schools in this punishing heat, she said. Teachers can't teach, students can't concentrate. Rather, our lives are at risk. Khan is one of more than 40 million students who have been shut out of classrooms in recent weeks. Heat waves have forced school closures in parts of Asia and North Africa. As the climate warms due to the burning of fossil fuels, heat waves are lasting longer and reaching higher temperatures. Government officials and public health experts across the world are increasingly struggling with whether to keep students learning in hot classrooms. Either decision has impacts. About 17% of the world's school-aged children are already out of school, says the United Nations. But the proportion is much larger in developing countries. Test scores in the developing world are also behind developed countries. Heat could worsen inequalities by widening learning gaps between wealthy countries and poor nations in the tropics, experts told Reuters. It could even worsen inequalities between rich and poor areas in wealthy countries. Sending children to hot schools can also make them sick. Earlier this spring, heat-related school closures in South Sudan affected over 2 million students. Temperatures rose to 45 degrees Celsius there in late March. Thousands of schools in the Philippines and in India closed schools in late April, impacting more than 10 million students. Last week, Cambodia ordered all public schools to cut 2 hours off the school day to avoid the peak heat at midday. Bangladesh has debated whether to close schools for about 33 million students. Temperatures there are rising to dangerous levels. Many Bangladeshi schools don't have fans, the ventilation is not good, and they do not provide good insulation, said Shumon Sengupta. He is Bangladesh country director for the non-profit organization Save the Children. Even if students continue attending classes during heat waves, their education is likely to suffer. High temperatures slow down the brain's functions, lowering students' ability to remember and process information. A 2020 study found that American high schoolers performed worse on standardized tests if they were exposed to higher temperatures in the year leading up to the exam. The research was published in the American Economic Journal. It found that a 0.55 Celsius degree warmer school year reduced that year's learning by 1%. Schools with air conditioning did not feel those same effects, said study co-writer Josh Goodman. He is an economist at Boston University. Goodman and his research partners found similar learning results tied to heat when they looked at standardized test data in other countries. When students in these places experience a year with more heat, they appear to have learned less, he said. Other research suggests high heat in the tropics can also impact a child's education even before birth. Children in Southeast Asia, exposed to higher than average temperatures in utero and early in life, received fewer years of schooling later in life. That information comes from a 2019 study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Goodman said as the world warms, already hot countries that become extremely hot countries will suffer more than cooler countries. Climate change will widen the learning gaps between hot and cool countries, Goodman said. Some developed countries are trying to find solutions to the issue. In March, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, announced it would build 30 heat-resilient schools in Jordan by 2026, a USAID spokesperson said. Heat-resilient buildings can remain comparatively cool in very hot weather. USAID said it would spend $8.17 million on the schools. The schools would have special cooling systems and air conditioning. The number of days that schools are closed for extreme heat has been increasing in the United States. Few countries record such data. In Bangladesh last year, schools were closed for 6 to 7 days, said Save the Children's Sengupta. But this year, they are saying it might be closed for 3 to 4 weeks, he said. May is often the hottest month in South Asia.
A California woman suffered from an episodic flu-like illness that defied explanation. Its origins stunned her doctors. There were few things Beth Sternlieb's Los Angeles doctors could say with certainty about her baffling illness, but this much was clear. Although manageable for years, it had worsened dramatically. For nearly 2 decades, Sternlieb had been plagued by flu-like episodes that began with a headache and abdominal pain accompanied by fatigue, muscle aches, and diarrhea. Within a day, a spotty red rash blanketed her abdomen. A yoga and meditation teacher who worked at the University of California at Los Angeles' pediatric pain program, Sternlieb had undergone numerous tests that failed to reveal the reason for the unidentified illness that occurred 2 or 3 times a year and lasted about 5 days. In 2004, after 17 years, the illness began occurring more frequently, and Sternlieb never fully recovered between episodes. A year later, she developed a high fever, chills and exhaustion that lasted 5 months and left her bedridden. The startling and highly unusual cause was finally identified after Sternlieb underwent an operation that ended up curing her. It was a good thing my abdomen turned red because it caught the attention of my doctors, Sternlieb said recently. Something was really wrong, but no one imagined this. Bad case of flu. The first episode occurred in December 1987, 2 weeks after Sternlieb's second child was born. I became sicker than I had ever been, said Sternlieb, then 37. It was flu season, and that year was a bad flu season, so doctors attributed her illness to influenza. 6 months later, the illness recurred, a pattern that prevailed for years. At first, Sternlieb didn't pay much attention to the tiny red dots that covered her abdomen. The rash resembled a sunburn, but wasn't itchy or painful. Doctors ultimately decided it was hives, a common skin condition that can occur as an allergic reaction to food or drugs. Often its cause is never discovered. I became sicker than I had ever been. It was flu season, and that year was a bad flu season, so doctors attributed her illness to influenza. Her primary care doctor referred her to a rheumatologist, a physician who specializes in treating autoimmune diseases, whom she saw for several years. He ordered blood tests, which he said suggested the presence of an unspecified autoimmune disorder in which the body mistakenly attacks itself. Over the years, Sternlieb noticed that the episodes seemed to occur during periods of stress, both good and bad, including traveling, partying, and too little sleep. I thought it must have a psychological component, she said. She learned to incorporate the bouts into her life, relieved that no one had found anything serious. She hoped doctors would figure out what was wrong so they could treat and eradicate whatever it was. Travel history. By 2005, Sternlieb's equanimity was shattered by a sharp deterioration in her health. That summer, she became seriously ill and did not recover. Her fever periodically spiked to 104 degrees, and she suffered from drenching night sweats as well as profound weakness and fatigue. She lost 15 pounds, and unable to work, spent most of her time in bed or on the couch. The rash that had been confined to her abdomen spread to her neck and torso. Blood tests showed elevated levels of inflammation and a high white blood cell count. Sternlieb began seeing a new crop of specialists. An infectious disease doctor combed through her travel history, which included a trip to India years earlier, ultimately ruling out malaria and other parasitic infections. Doctors considered and discarded a variety of diagnoses, including fever of unknown origin, which can be associated with some autoimmune diseases, familial Mediterranean fever, an inherited genetic disorder that causes recurrent fevers and inflammation, as well as HIV and hepatitis. That left an infection or an allergy as possible causes. The latter seemed unlikely despite recurrent hives, said Rafi Takjian, then a fellow in allergy and immunology at UCLA, and one of the doctors Sternlieb consulted. Hives usually last 24 hours and are not like this, which was chronic, he recalled. We needed to look deeper into anything unusual. It seemed that there was something packing some heat somewhere that was triggering a reaction from Sternlieb's immune system. We see this in sinuses where antibiotics don't reach infected tissue and result in a smoldering infection that becomes virtually impossible to eradicate with medication, he added. A CT scan ordered by the infectious disease doctor showed multiple uterine fibroids, common benign tumors that don't require treatment unless they cause problems. The scan showed that one of the fibroids had grown very large and was possibly degenerating, dying, or necrotic, dead, which happens when a tumor loses its blood supply. A degenerating fibroid can get very big very fast. But doctors were also concerned about the possibility of a rare cancer, such as a leiomyosarcoma, which grows in smooth muscles, including in uterine tissue. None of her doctors, including her new gynecologist Jessica Schneider, knew whether her long-standing illness and the fibroids were related, and what explained the hives, which are not associated with fibroids or this cancer. It didn't seem obvious that a fibroid would cause this, said Schneider, a member of the Cedars-Sinai Medical Group. But it didn't look like a typical fibroid, and I recommended we take it out. Sternlieb, who said she worried she might still be sick after a hysterectomy, agreed. During the December 2005 operation, Schneider removed 8 fibroids. The largest measured a whopping 11 centimeters, the size of a large grapefruit. Nearly 20 years later, Schneider vividly remembers its unique characteristics. Typically, a fibroid is a solid ball of muscle, she said. This one was full of pus that spurted explosively when it was touched with a scalpel. It was crazy, said Schneider, who had never seen anything like it before and hasn't since. She administered antibiotics and took a culture that she sent to the pathology lab for analysis. Takjian remembers that Schneider called him just after she finished surgery to tell him what she had found. I thought we need to know what the heck grew, Takjian said. We were crossing our fingers that surgery would take care of it, whatever it was. But only time would tell. A nice nest. A few weeks later, the first question was answered. The culture showed an unknown strain of Salmonella, a common bacterial infection that is usually caused by contaminated food. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that it causes more than 1.3 million illnesses annually and results in more than 26,000 hospitalizations and 420 deaths. Neither Sternlieb nor her doctors knew how or when she contracted Salmonella, which is known to cause hives if it settles in the intestine, Takjian said. In Sternlieb's case, the bacteria had burrowed into only one fibroid. The other 7 were free of Salmonella. I kept asking older doctors if they'd ever seen anything like this, and they said they hadn't. It probably seeded itself in the GI tract and thought, here's a nice nest for me, said Takjian, who practices in Santa Monica and is an associate clinical professor of medicine and pediatrics at the UCLA David Geffen School of Medicine. But the duration of Sternlieb's infection, its location in a uterine fibroid, and the recurring hives made the case something of a fashionoma, medical slang for an unusual and unusually interesting case, a status that would be enhanced by the discovery of its source. I kept asking older doctors if they'd ever seen anything like this, and they said they hadn't, Schneider said. A search of medical journals conducted by Takjian turned up nothing similar. Because Salmonella is a reportable disease, California health officials were notified. Several months after her operation, Sternlieb received a home visit from a public health nurse with startling news. Her infection had been traced not to food, but to a reptile. Turtles are known to harbor Salmonella, One reason federal law has long banned the sale of small turtles because of the risk they pose to young children. Other reptiles, including snakes, frogs, and lizards, are also carriers, which is why public health officials stress the importance of hand washing after touching them. But her family never had a pet reptile, Sternlieb said, because her symptoms started shortly after giving birth. Sternlieb's infectious disease doctor suspected she might have contracted the infection in the hospital, possibly from a staff member. At times during pregnancy and before delivery, the mother's immune system is suppressed to prevent it from rejecting the fetus. Another possibility, said Sternlieb, who racked her brain trying to recall possible reptile exposures from nearly 2 decades earlier, is that the infection was transmitted by a pet reptile at the nursery school her then 4-year-old son attended. But she added that he never brought a reptile home and that she doesn't remember the school keeping such pets. Schneider said she began to recover almost immediately after surgery and has never had another episode. Doctors deemed the surgery a cure. Tak Jian said he suspects she was exposed in the hospital and added that it's fortunate she underwent surgery when she did. Had the fibroid ruptured, Sternlieb could have developed sepsis, a potentially fatal infection that results from bacteria coursing through the bloodstream. In 2010, Tak Jian, Schneider, and 2 other doctors published a report of her case in the journal Obstetrics and Gynecology. Their goal, Tak Jian said, was to alert other doctors to consider abdominal hives as a possible sign of a simmering pelvic infection. You want these reports so the next doctor that runs into something like this gets imaging quickly.
Sharpen your skills with this next listening session. Listen closely and snag every new word that floats by. Let's master your vocabulary. Unsheathe your inner voice and practice pronouncing each word. Craft a short sentence to acquire its meaning and lock it in your memory. Let's unleash your vocabulary potential.
Narratives. John Carter, a successful lawyer, said goodnight to the office security guard late that evening. He had had a hard day, and all he wanted was to be driving home through the empty streets. As he left the huge building, he took a look at the moonlit sky. The night was rather warm for October, but still he felt a bit chilly, so he pulled on his cashmere coat and headed for the car. He was just about to reach for his keys when suddenly he felt rough hands grabbing at his coat. A harsh voice hissed in his ear.
"Think you can have it all, don't you?"
A hard and heavy object hit the back of his head, and then he saw the cold pavement rushing towards his face. When Carter didn't return home, his wife Miriam grew worried. By the next morning, she knew something was terribly wrong, and decided to call the police. 2 weeks passed, and finally the police chief invited Miriam down to the station.
"We're very sorry, Mrs. Carter,"
he said gravely,
"but your husband seems to have disappeared without a trace. We'll continue the search, but please don't get too hopeful."
Miriam refused to give up and decided to go to the newspapers. She had her husband's photograph published and offered a large reward for anyone that could help her find him. The months went by, and eventually Miriam started to come to terms with the fact that her husband might never come home. She decided to start working again, not because she needed the money, but just to get out of the house that she and her husband had shared. Miriam quickly found a job organizing fundraising events for a charity organization, which fed and offered shelter to the city's homeless. It wasn't until 6 months later, though, that she actually visited one of their hostels in the city center.
"Tragic, isn't it?"
said Mike, one of the in-house counselors.
"You see him over there?"
he added, pointing to a tramp who was dressed in dirty, ragged clothes and staring intently at Miriam.
"Poor devil doesn't even know his own name. You should have seen him when he first came here. Looked like he'd been run over by a bus."
Miriam watched the tramp as he raised his coffee cup to his lips, his eyes still fixed on her face. Then he stood up and walked over to her.
"Have you got £1 for a sandwich?"
he asked. Her heart began to hammer. and involuntarily she reached forward and pushed the matted locks of hair away from his eyes.
John?
She gasped. A deep frown creased his forehead, and his confused eyes searched her face.
Do you know who I am?
He whispered.
Yes, of course.
She answered, barely able to hold back her tears.
Please tell me,
he said.
I can't remember.
You will hear a woman called Jan phoning a man about their local conservation group.
Hello?
Oh, hello. My name's Jan. Are you the right person to talk to about the Buckworth Conservation Group?
Yes, I'm Peter. I'm the secretary.
Good. I've just moved to this area and I'm interested in getting involved. I was in a similar group where I used to live. Could you tell me something about your activities, please?
Of course. Well, we have a mixture of regular activities and special events. One of the regular ones is trying to keep the beach free of litter. A few of us spend a couple of hours a month on it, and it's awful how much there is to clear. I wish people would be more responsible and take it home with them.
I totally agree. I'd be happy to help with that. Is it okay to take dogs?
I'm afraid not, as they're banned from the beach itself. You can take them along the cliffs, though, and children are welcome.
Right.
We also manage a nature reserve, and there's a lot to do there all year round. For example, because it's a popular place to visit, we spend a lot of time looking after the paths and making sure they're in good condition for walking.
I could certainly help with that.
Good. And we have a program of creating new habitats there. We've just finished making and installing nesting boxes for birds to use, and next we're going to work on encouraging insects. They're important for the biodiversity of the reserve.
They certainly are.
Oh, and we're also running a project to identify the different species of butterflies that visit the reserve. You might be interested in taking part in that.
Sure. I was involved in something similar where I used to live, counting all the species of moths. I'd enjoy that.
Another job we're doing at the reserve is replacing the wall on the southern side, between the parking area and our woodshed. It was badly damaged in a storm last month.
Okay.
Then, as I said, we have a program of events as well, both at the weekend and during the week.
Right. I presume you have guided walks. I'd like to get to know the local countryside as I'm new to the area.
Yes, we do. The next walk is to Ruston Island a week on Saturday. We'll be meeting in the car park at Dunsmore Beach at low tide. That's when the sands are dry enough for us to walk to the island without getting wet.
Sounds good.
The island's a great place to explore. It's quite small and it's got a range of habitats. It's also an ideal location for seeing seals just off the coast or even on the beach.
Okay. And is there anything we should bring? Like a picnic, for instance?
Yes, do bring one, as it's a full-day walk. And of course, it'll be wet walking across and back, so make sure your boots are waterproof.
I must buy a new pair. There's a hole in one of my current ones. Well, I'd definitely like to come on the walk.
Great. Then later this month, we're having a one-day woodwork session in Hopton Wood.
I've never tried that before. Is it okay for beginners to take part?
Definitely. There'll be a couple of experts leading the session, and we keep the number of participants down, so you'll get as much help as you need.
Excellent. I'd love to be able to make chairs.
That's probably too ambitious for one day. You'll be starting with wooden spoons. And of course, learning how to use the tools. And anything you make is yours to take home with you.
That sounds like fun. When is it?
It's on the 17th from 10 a.m. until 3. There's a charge of £35, including lunch, or £40 if you want to camp in the wood.
I should think I'll come home the same day. Well, I'd certainly like to join the group. It sounds...
We'll see you next time for more exciting and helpful videos to help you master your speaking fluency through our listening sessions. Thank you for being with us.